episode number 58, Mary Kerr.
All right, cut to edge of stage. Great. All right, color frost.
Check. 1, 2, 3. Check.
Stand by, please. Heads to half, heads out, letting cues 1 through 10, down cues 1 through 10.
Welcome back to The Title Block, a podcast about Canadian theatre designers, their history, and their craft. And I am, of course, as usual, your host, Michael Cruz. And this time I have an interview with the iconic Canadian designer, Mary Kerr. So it's been a while since I released another episode of The Title Block, and the world has changed irrevocably. As we hunker down and eschew most physical connections, maybe we can turn to the past to get some small comfort and even some inspiration from what we've done and have witnessed as artists and audiences. Now I'm starting to get through the rest of my interviews from the West Coast and working on some more immediate projects to help share the story of the history of Canadian theatre design. It's important to remind everyone that if you find yourself in a tight financial spot and need support, the Actors Fund of Canada is there to help get you through it. And if you find yourself able to donate to the AFC, please go to afchelps.ca and support Canadian artists during this most troubling of times. Now, my guest this time on The Title Block is the fantastic Mary Kerr. I met Mary in her home in Victoria in December of, 2018, and I am pleased to finally share this with you. Now, please go to the show notes at thetitleBlock.com, where I have some archival photographs of Mary's work on the Commonwealth Games in 1994 and Expo 86, as well as the design for her iconic three-penny opera that debuted at the Banff Centre and Canadian Stage in the late 1980s. For more of Mary's portfolio, you can check out Natalie Rewa's Scenography in Canada, which she is featured in. Now, this interview, yes, is a bit out of order, and I speak briefly of my interview with Robert Gardner that I will release over the next month. It's really important to note that this conversation in the second half that concerns the Commonwealth Games dips into the roots of Indigenous performance and storytelling on the west coast of Turtle Island. I'm very aware that we are two settlers talking about the cultural practices of the First Nations of the Pacific Northwest, specifically about the creation legend of the Quadillica clan. Now, on this trip, it was painfully obvious that I need to seek out and talk with designers and artists that work in this tradition and stop talking about them, and I guarantee this is a priority for me. Now, I will also not be charging the wonderful supporters at patreon.com while we all pause in theatre in Canada. But I want to thank every one of them for your continuing and past support. Now, here's my interview with designer Mary Kerr. Mary Kerr is a set and costume designer that's been working in Canadian theatre for many, many years. Upwards of, we think, probably 45 years. But as she says, theater is the family business. And she joins me today on The Title Block. Mary, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you.
So,
welcome to my home.
Oh, yes. And I'm here in lovely Victoria, BC, where Mary has invited me into her home to ask her all these very personal questions about her career. So I'm glad that she's allowed me that opportunity. And I should say to everyone who's listening, Mary has become a Patreon subscriber to the show. So I thank her for her support.
So join everyone.
Yes, indeed.
If you want this to happen.
Yeah, exactly.
If you want us to have a history.
Yeah, exactly. So Mary, how did you get started in theater? Because you had a non-traditional training. You didn't go to theater school specifically, but I understand you started in theater and in this kind of theatrical lifestyle many years before. So tell me how you found your way there and how theater became your life.
Well, I think it was simply because it was in the air in my family. Every spring for the dance recitals, the house would erupt into tutus and clown costumes and dancing horses. Many of the things I've incorporated in my Toy Castle television series that I did, almost as a sentimental memory to the little girl I was at that time. I'm terribly sentimental. It's really silly. But Mum's dance school, she just propped me against the rehearsal pianist, because they had a rehearsal pianist then. And I'd sit there and I'd hum, and she'd be doing tap dancing or this or that. And then I became her legs. I'd get up on in the studio, and I would do it in reverse while she went around making corrections. So I'd have a class of 18-year-olds, and I'd be this 4-year-old. So I'm a really fast study, and Mum used to take me to all the dance masters conferences down in Chicago where they'd be 500 people, 500 legs like me, a 15-year-old or a 14-year-old on the floor, learning a fast number in an hour. She'd get the record rather, she'd get the steps, and I'd have it in my neurology. That was really fun. So I'm a fast study. But the Playhouse Theatre in Winnipeg was a magical place to me. And every spring we'd put on 3 or 4 shows there. And the Playhouse at that stage still had a hemp house, and it had footlights. And that was magical to me. And at night, when they were finished, they would do the whole thing about putting the light in the middle of the stage. And I'd sit in the audience and look at it as I was waiting for Mum to finish things up and do stuff. I'd just be sitting there watching this space and imagining. Or I'd sit on the stage and look out to the audience and imagine. It was such a magical place. And the dressing rooms downstairs and the side aisles. And Mum would be on one side at the front wing, and I'd be at the other side doing the steps for the students, because we never had a curtain come down. Mum was interesting. She was very inventive. And I think I got a lot of my courage from her about what to do on stage. And at 11, I started teaching baton twirling in the basement for 25 cents a lesson. I just was fascinated with baton twirling, not being a majorette, not the tits and teeth stuff. I was interested in the juggling quality. Things I see now in Cirque du Soleil, I laugh, these fire batons, and I did all that. And at one stage, I lied about my age and became a blue bomberette, which was the halftime marching corps, because Donna Fiala was the only one in town who did any of this stuff. And there was 50 of us, but they were all about 16, 17, 18. I was only 13, 14, but I was a pretty developed girl at that point. And I just thought it'd be fun. And so I did that for a few years. But every summer I'd go down to band camps in the States, in Milwaukee and Chicago and Minneapolis, and I'd learn rifle spinning and flag spinning and corps marching and acrobatic and 2-baton and 3-baton. And I was really good, and I just loved it. But anyway, at 11, it was just beginning. And so I started teaching. I went around to every door in the neighborhood and said, I'm going to give classes for 25 cents. And I had about 7 students. And I think when I was 12, she let me start teaching up in the studio. And I had pom-pom corps. I had 50-girl pom-pom corps that would work at the amateur football things. I mean, it's partly why when I did the Commonwealth Games, I'm so comfortable with designing for spectacle, because I own that space. I've been a performer on that space, and I'm comfortable there. And but I just had such fun with all that. And I taught tap dancing and things like that too. And I was the rear end of a dancing horse many a time. Sometimes the front end, and I would make the horse, and I'd make the eyes move. But I started in the studio, and I learned the family business. I learned enormous amount of discipline, because every Saturday morning we'd be packing up the calophone and the other stuff and go and start. And I'd be at this point, let's say at university, and I'd be teaching all day Saturday and 3 or 4 days after school, and still getting my 45 hours of class, because I was in fine arts by then, done. What it did was teach me an enormous, I guess I just was lucky. I had a lot of energy. I was really healthy. I got bronchitis twice a year. It was Winnipeg. But nonetheless, I was healthy. And my mother taught me a really disciplined energy and a real joy of sharing things with people, and a great respect for the audience. Yeah. I've often had really interesting questions with when I was in fine arts, and I'll get to how I got to fine arts, but I'd have questions with the artists and with some of the theater people I knew, and they'd say, the actors would say, oh, I don't care if the audience cares. Like, I don't, I'm doing art. And I'd say, well, I care. I don't understand that, because if we're doing good art, the audience will be there, and we're doing it for an audience, and we have to pay for what for some reason, I guess all that practical stuff was in my mind because of what I'd experienced since I was 3. And then I designed the costumes for the shows. I should show you. I have drawings of them, these little kid drawings. And I would do pencils, and then we would put them on the Gestetner, because there wasn't printers. And I'd figure out how to do it. And I'd be sitting there with the mothers, and I'd be this 12-year-old saying, now, here's how you're going to do it. Because I did all my own sewing. And I sewed all my own clothing until I left home, which helped. It wasn't tailoring like a wonderful, Avril Stevenson or some of the great cutters I've worked with could do. But I was not bad. I could throw it together. And I basically could explain to them stuff. It's really funny. I don't know if I'm just hot-wired for it, but I've always been able to understand space. And I've always been able to understand spatial relationships of the body. And because I move and dance, and I love dancing, I used to want to go and be a Broadway dancer. But then I became 5'6", and I weighed 114 or 120 pounds. And they said, no, you're a horse. You're not tall enough, not thin enough. Or I wanted to be a ballet dancer. I studied at the Royal Winnipeg with Arnold Spohr as a little fat kid when I was 9. And he'd go around with that big cane and right near my foot, and I later became friends with him when he hired me to do big top ballet there, and I loved working for the Royal Winnipeg. But at the time, it was a strange learning, and I wasn't the right body, even no matter how many ballet books I read.
That's remarkable. But so when you went to what made you go to fine art school then? So you were
the way that worked was that they never knew what to do with me because I was drawing on the margins of all my scribblers. I'd finished the work in the class really fast, and then so I got really bored. So they started putting me in mixed classes. Then they started jumping classes for me. So I actually finished up a little early, and in grade 11 in Winnipeg, you could go straight to first-year university. So I did that, and I thought at that stage I was really intrigued with fine arts and architecture. And in grade 7, when I'd helped Miss Kreiderman do, she taught art, and I helped her one day in between classes prepare for the classes. And she gave me some clay. We'd done some clay, and she said, yeah, take some home and play with it if you want. So I did this sculpture, and I brought it back to her, and she said, you did that? Mm-hmm. And it looked like a little, I look at it now, I have it somewhere, a little Incan figure of someone sort of sitting there holding a pot between their knees and their hands with their mouth on the lid. And it just kind of came out of my hands. And she did that kind of look at me, and she said, what are you going to do when you get to grade 11? I said, I don't know. I was thinking of architecture. And she said, no, you're going to go with fine arts. She said, here's a folder and a brochure, And she says, I'm taking night school right now. This is where you need to go. So I took it home to my parents, and I said, look what she showed me. Because they thought maybe teaching or something, Got really excited about that. And so I had that thing almost like a talisman for years. But in grade 11, my dad's he said, well, if you're an A student, and I was a top student in Manitoba that year, he said, I'll give you a free pass, because Air Canada, you get free passes. So I went overseas, and that was the start of my first drawing sketchbook of traveling all over Europe. And God knows that they were confident enough to let me go. But I bicycled all over, and I looked at art shows, and I saw some amazing musicals. I saw My Fair Lady with Rex Harrison on it. I saw Music Man with Chita Rivera. I saw King Kong, this wonderful thing about a boxer, a musical from South Africa. and it had a moving escalator at the front. I thought, oh, that's neat. So I saw art. I saw my first William Blakes. I walked into the National Gallery, and my parents had given me lots of books like Leonardo da Vinci, Fragonard, Ingres, fairly realistic things. And so I just went and looked at the realistic. I went to Rembrandt, and the eyes followed me around the room, and I thought that was fascinating. But I ignored all the modernists. After the first year in art school, of course, I went and I looked at those and came back and I said, "Oh, why are you looking at those things?" It was really funny how you educate your eyes. But that trip changed my life. We were not a wealthy family. We worked hard for our money, but we were never without. My granny lived with me and my uncle lived with us. So I had 2 or 3 dogs. But what that meant was it gave me the education of a wealthy girl. Because no one else was going and spending the whole summer in Europe. And I did this till I was 23. One of those years was totally instrumental, I guess, looking backward in the way I approached theater design, and that was seeing David Hockney's Ubu. It wasn't on that long. And my girlfriend had just graduated and was unhappy in London. Dad said, "Well, here's a pass. Why don't you go and see her this weekend?" I thought, that's a nice idea.
We should also mention that your dad was
that scared me.
Sorry about that. Your father was a pilot, was he? Or worked for the
he
airline?
Was an aeronautical engineer.
Aeronautical engineer, that's right. So he worked for Air Canada or Trans.
On weekends, now that's another influence that has affected my use of technical materials like corrugated steel and wood and mechanical things on stage, and why my brain actually thinks quite systematically as well as imaginatively, is that on the weekends he'd take me into the hangar. And here would be the North Stars and the DC-9s and the constellations and stuff, all taken apart. And the smell of gasoline was amazing. And we'd walk through it, and I'd look at all the rivets and the bolts and the metal, and I just loved it. And the men couldn't get over it, this kid wandering around, because he did this since I was about 4. And I was just so excited about how things came apart and how they came together. I mean, that was today when we picked her up at the harbour. This was so neat to see a prop plane again. And I took my flying license at one stage on the little Cessnas. I never quite finished it. And don't ask me to fly anything now. But I was just so interested in the idea of not having to follow the rules, not have to follow the highways. I wanted the overview, and that's a big symbol in my life. I always wanted the overview.
It doesn't surprise me you became the designer you are now from all of those influences. I can see all of the themes in your life since we've been speaking for several hours here at your home, sort of coming together from your early adulthood there. You also studied medieval studies and architecture as well? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so tell me about how...
The way that worked was that at the last minute I decided to go into the architecture school, not the fine arts. Right. And I was there for a couple of years. And the biggest part of that was the art history classes, which did carry on when I went into fine arts because they were buildings nearby and they were some courses we all shared. But they had this amazing library. And every day I was in that library pulling out every book I'd ever could see about structure and about design. That was really quite something. But I was not good in the chemistry and the physics. And at one stage, and I failed those, like -2 in chemistry. It was a computer test, right? So I was just guessing. And whereas I was getting A+ in English and philosophy and French and So the counselor said, "Darling, I think maybe you should think of going into fine arts because if you fail another year, you're out." I was shocked because, I was the top student in my mind. But she was right. I also was very excited in the first years of university. I wrote for the Manitoban. I was in this, I was in that. I did sketches. I taught. I probably did far too much. I sat in on other classes. I was just so excited about being in a university community of people who want to talk about ideas. Because I'd grown up in Silver Heights where the biggest thing was, have you done your nails today? Are we going to the bowling alley? Let's hang around the pharmacy. What do you mean you're going home to practice the piano? So I was in the architecture, fascinating, but I moved sideways into fine arts. Excuse me. And what I loved about the Bachelor of Fine Arts honors was that I fell in love with English. I had an amazing teacher, Judy Flynn, Dr. Judy Flynn, who didn't suffer fools. And she came into our first class. She always denies that she said this, but I know it was true because it just shocked me. Came into our first class, pixie haircut, we had to wear black gowns at St. John's because it was an Anglican college. And she threw her books down, quite pregnant. And she sort of said, I'm a graduate student. I'm working on I think it was her PhD. And she says, I don't want to teach you, but they're making me teach you. And you don't know anything. So I expect you all to just be quiet for the first term and listen. And then the second term, I might let you ask questions. And if you don't want that, get out now. And then she left the room. And the whole room was in shock, right? Some of us stayed and moved up to the front row, and others left. She's still a good friend and still an inspiration. But because of her, I ended up taking about 5 or 6 English courses that I wasn't supposed to take as a visual. So I took a kind of a combined course. And when I graduated, actually, the dean wanted me to go to Oxford for English, and I wanted to go to Yale for sculpture. So it was they were both at a fairly high level. And I say this only because it's something I really believe designers need to be an equal to talk to their directors. I think you need to be on equal grounds. And that might mean, if it's drama you're interested in or music, that you actually trained in those areas so that you can be a good collaborator. Yeah. But the art school was wonderful for me. We did 9 hours of drawing a week. We did, I think, 4 hours of history. It just went on and on for 4 years. It was wonderful.
Mm-hmm. So how on earth did you make it to theater?
Well,
I mean, all the elements are there.
Yeah.
But you're so far
not there.
You're not there. You're not working in professional theater or working with professional directors or writers or other designers.
The image I use to my students now, whenever I'm talking about what is theater, I said it's a wheel. And each spoke. I said theater is not an art in itself. It's a combination, a collaboration of arts. And each spoke, like writing, art, movement, music, philosophy, psychology, all these different spokes come together into the hub, which can be whatever you're doing. And if it comes together well, the wheel turns. If it doesn't, it's broken. I think I was just gathering all my spokes. And I remember in 4th year, a friend, Colin Gorey, who's now in England producing big music festivals, he was an architect and he was also like directing. So he said, could you do me some designs for Mad Woman of Shiloh? So I just did a few drawings. I had no comprehension other than they had to find. He just wanted some looks. So there were 2 shows in Winnipeg, and the other one was Three Cuckolds, and Stephen Katz, who became quite a director down at the Guthrie, had me do it for theater across the street. The other thing is, John Hirsch was in Winnipeg at that time. He's one of the biggest influences in my sense of theatricality as well. He brought Brecht and Weil to Winnipeg. He believed, as an artistic director, that he could bring an audience along and educate them, not just do crap, like things they'd accept, but to stretch them and to move them and to ask them to go somewhere. And I took acting classes from him when I was 8, when he first came over as a Hungarian refugee from the Holocaust. I was on his TV show as a kid. I mean, we became friends. And we nearly worked together once on a show called Vaudeville at Canadian Stage, but then he got something in New York and it canceled. But at the end of his life, when he was so ill, because he got AIDS too, and Stephen and he were good friends as well. So Stephen and I went over there, and Stephen counseled him.
This is Stephen Katz.
Stephen Katz, The great Stephen Katz, who died in, I think it was 88 or 89 of AIDS. and who we did 10 shows together, and I wouldn't be in theater if it wasn't for Stephen. But we would be at John's place, and he gave me the famous comments: "Lots of fame, lots of glory, no money, eh, Mary?" Like for being in theater as the thing. But he, like Stephen, was furious because they had so much more to say and do with their lives. But that's an aside. But he was at one of his prime peaks of exploration at Manitoba Theatre Centre at that time. And I saw his mother courage with Len Cariou as the soldier, Martha Henry as the young girl, Frances Hyland as the girl on the roof, Douglas Rain as the cook, and Siobhan, what is it? She's the one from Australia. Okay. That really great actress playing Mother Courage. And I think, who did the design? But he directed. I have sketches because I was a student and they let me come into the dress rehearsals and sketch by the light of the little light on the things. And so I have these wonderful sketches of all the people like working. I was just dumbfounded. I had never encountered Brecht. I had never encountered that music. And she'd be trying to sing, da 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 da, and she'd, shit, I can't get it. And this was in rehearsal, right? Now, darling, you just do this now. You're okay. All right, I'll try it again. And then I got nearly every boyfriend I had to take me. I went about 8 times. I wrote down all the musical lyrics. I mean, it just had such an effect on me. Not the design particularly. It was fairly traditional Stratford stuff, broken down British approach. It was beautiful. It was fine. But what I was taken with was the direction, the movement of the people, and the brilliance of the actors. And I've since know enough to know that some people say, you actually saw that, It was one of those great moments in Canadian theatre, and I was lucky enough. I've been really lucky, I have to say, just as an overview. I have been so blessed and lucky in my lifetime. When I had to choose, in a way, between going back to my sculpture or carrying on with theatre design, I realized I'd rather reach more people than maybe 30 people in a gallery show. And I was an interesting sculptor. The Canada Council said I should carry on. They'd give me grants. But there was something about it being too private. But so those little things happened. Then I went off to... I actually applied to Yale and to Philadelphia and to, where was the other one? I think it was Central St. Martin's. And I got grants in all of them, but my then fiancé didn't. He got one for Waterloo. So we went to Waterloo. But Waterloo it was the best thing because Waterloo was doing a very experimental course called a Master of Applied Science in Design, where we worked with computers. I learned how to program Fortran. I was one of the first women in Canada to learn how to work on these things. I hated it. It wasn't, but as they said, it was all engineers and product designers and architects and me, the one artist. And the main thing we were trying, because it was the first year this course was taken, we got huge scholarships. And they really wanted to explore the design process through a scientific model. And they've since carried on with all of that. That course turned into the architecture school, I gather. And we had to figure out the 10 design steps, processes in design. What are the 10 steps? And we all agreed on the first 8. And then at 9 I said, and then you make a creative leap. And they all went, what is a creative leap? Because suddenly I was the flake, right? The flake in the room. And a woman, God help us, because I was the only woman in the course. There was about 8 of us. It was a very specialized little thing. And we studied McLuhan, we studied cybernetics, we studied synchronicity, we studied computers. It was the only place in Canada, actually, that you could do this. And, I've forgotten. What I also took as a directed study was a course in modern theatre with Dr. Larry Cummings. And he ran a group called St. Ethelwald's Players, a medieval group. And that's where I met Paul Frappier, who played this great Herod. And he was amazing because he opened me up to Beckett and to UNESCO and all these amazing people that I thought, oh, I didn't know theatre could be that. So St. Ethelwald's Players was really fun. I did it all with felt and glued together and whatever. But I didn't think anything more of it. You know, it was just something I was doing at the time. And then we moved to Toronto, and I never finished the degree in Waterloo because this whiplash I had when I first graduated that I told you about had gotten worse and worse, and it was very hard to study. And in retrospect, I think I was in a depression. I'd sit and I'd just gotten married. We gotten married there that spring, and I think I just sat in my room and listened to Prokofiev's music for Romeo and Juliet and cried. And in retrospect, I think that was a depression. We went to Toronto, and I registered in a graduate school to do a makeup year so I could go into the Medieval Center. And within 2 weeks, I was fine. Because suddenly I was talking to people and having people to talk to, and because I just love sitting over coffee and talking and thinking of ideas and things. And in the Medieval Center, this wonderful woman, Dr. Alexandra Johnson, taught us Chaucer. And I thought, this is so much fun. Chaucer is really a theater guy. He's humorous, he's funny, and humor seems to be one of the strands as I'm trying to think about what mattered to me in my career lately. This project with Stephen Katz and myself I've contacted a lot of our old friends and a lot of our actors. I've gone through all the programs. Do you have anything you could say about Stephen or about our shows? You know, because I don't think people realized how unusual they were. Today, they don't realize. And I want people to remember him. But
where did you guys meet? Like, what do you want to tell me?
We
that
met
story?
at the graduate school because I had, in the Medieval Center, I was taking a course with Professor Lyerly, Professor Lyerly's seminar group was what the PLS was modified from. They said it was just the Society for Drinking in Cups. But if we were taking this course on medieval theatre around a table, about 8 of us, we had to put on a show in this class. So we put on Secunda Pastorum, and it was sort of along the lines of how medieval towns work. If you were really bossy, you'd be the director. If you were a good town speaker, you'd be the actor. And if you could sew and draw, you were the designer. So that's how the lines broke up. So I designed this. It was really nothing, but my Mary had a halo of baby's breath. And the baby had a rainbow halo. And I had this Annunciation angel, which was all covered in silver and had huge wings. And we just put it on at Hart House. And everyone kind of went, just within the Medieval Center. And within the next week or two, I was asked to do the Digby play of Mary Magdalene with Rainer Zauer, which was going on at Westminster United, down across from where the old National Ballet used to be. And Toronto Dance Theatre was dancing the Harrowing Angels and the Harrowing and the Seven Deadly Sins. And it was amazing. I mean, hundreds, there were so many costumes. So I just had all these wives of people at the center sew. And I did big drawings, and I had parties, because at that stage I had a lot of architecture friends and lawyer friends. And because my husband, my first husband, who was an architect, we went with a pretty fast group and pretty wealthy group. And he was working with Ron Tom and, designing for them and stuff. And it was quite interesting because I'd take these big drawings, I have a big meal, and then I'd sit them all down when they were kind of drunk, and I'd put them all on the floor, and I'd say, okay, who wants to do one? Because a lot of them were artists, right? And so Sheila would say, well, I'll paint the Annunciation angel with all the wings. That'd be fun. And someone else said, well, I'll do the one of the this, because that'll be fun. And I'll do I cut out all the Seven Deadly Sins. Jackie Burroughs was one of the she played Lust. And the concept was that they just wear body stockings with really grotesque makeup, and they had plastic pretty faces, and I put them in rainbow, 3 or 4 shades of red, 3 or 4 shades of yellow. Sloth was yellow, Envy was green. And in Renaissance costumes, transparently, so you could see all the body parts underneath, but they looked beautiful to Mary. And as Curiosity, who was dressed like a peacock with all the colors and a kind of a Renaissance splendor, because these weren't that conceptual. They were sort of conceptual, but they were sort of realistic. Most of my conceptual work starts with realism. And they would dance around her in a beautiful drumbeat dance. This was Toronto Dance Theatre, with the masks, and they'd look at her and they'd be beautiful, and they'd look at the audience and they'd be devils. And she was fascinated with them, because that's what Curiosity is. But as they wound her into their net, they would do a strip and all the clothes would come off. And Jackie did a real burlesque strip until they were just writhing around her like snakes. It was so interesting. It was a good group to work with. And Trish Beattie said, well, I'll play Despair. And I said, that'd be an 8th sin. There is no sin called despair. And she says, there is if you want my dance group. I went, okay, because I was definitely the junior here.
Can you just give us an idea what year this was as well?
Gosh.
Can you remember?
69, 70.
Okay, yeah.
Somewhere in there.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Somewhere in there. And but it was very Keith Urban and different dancers. You probably, Amelia, because you wouldn't know, but they were all wonderful dancers with Toronto Dance. Astrid would know them all. And so, with the huge, I felt like creatures with wings. And he sort of came down the center aisle. And my Satan was dressed like a Medici prince, Geza Kovac, amazing actor, with a set of pearls and hair out and long. He was like a strange bat with huge Renaissance sleeves in black velvet. And the world, because we had the world, the flesh, and the devil, of course. I've got that cape downstairs, and it had all my symbolism of the sun and the moon on one side. And the flesh was funny. It was just all big penises and grapes. People were all... and the devil. So that it was medieval. I just love medieval. For some reason, the Middle Ages is something that's always felt really interesting to me. Christine de Pizan's writings and Eloise and Abelard and Chaucer. I loved it. Anyway, and then they asked me to do another one called A Herod, and it went to the PMLA conferences, and it also went down to the States. And Glenn Wickham, who was the medieval scholar and wrote the big book on medieval theater, was at it, and he said it was one of the most interesting interpretations he'd ever seen. And he didn't mean interesting in a bad sense. He meant, no, it would have been the way a village had done it, but because all they ever were doing before I got in there was sackcloth and burlap and felt things. But for some reason, the Herod was all done from the Duc de Berry's Tres Richeurs. And he came in on a huge horse, Herod, that we wheeled in. And there was 2 Hellmouth and a tree at the top of Jesse. And Kate Nelligan played both the devil and Mary. R.H. Thompson was in it as a harrowing soldier. Bronwyn Draney was there as a woman. Skip Shand he directed it. And we had a lot of fun with that. But those were the 3 shows that brought me to the attention of Professor Brian Parker, who ran the theater department. They did not have a practical theater department the way we do at UVic or at York or whatever, but it was more of a theoretical. But he had a student, he said, who was really brilliant and had done a very interesting interpretation of Measure for Measure. And he wondered if putting the 2 of us together might be an interesting show at Harthouse. That was Stephen. And we met at the Buttery. And I said, oh, sure. Because by that stage I was having fun. I did go to Professor Lyerly and say, look, I haven't written my paper on theater, but I've designed 3 of your shows. Couldn't you give me a credit? Oh, no, you have. So I've never got my degree in medieval studies either. That bothered me. Yeah. I thought, I'd just done these 3 big shows all in 1 year. Yeah. Anyway, so we met in the Buttery, and I'm writing about this because I'm I'm really interested in people not forgetting who Stephen Katz was. Stephen Katz was Robert Lepage at the time. And we were a very interesting team. But I came in, and here was this little guy in overalls and a long beard and bandana around his head, smoking ferociously. And we met, and he had seen my shows. I guess that's why he was also interested. But he'd never directed. I don't think he directed anything before that either. So it was a meeting of... Yeah. And, but Stephen was also very visual, and he was also a designer. So he had designed the set for this already. So it would be costumes I'd be doing. And he's probably one of the most intelligent people I'd ever met. And I just couldn't believe... His parents were both writers. Sid Katz and Dorothy Katz. Sidney Katz used to write for Maclean's all the time and exposés and things. So it was a very intellectual family, a bit like Danny Grossman's. The mother was Protestant, the father was Jewish, and there was this wonderful clash of things. But anyway, he said, okay, these are the characters for Measure. I'd like us to do it in a 60s or 70s, early sort of hippie mod, like now. And I've added these different characters, because he always would add characters and bookends and things entre acts, which I didn't. Hey, sure, fine. I'm a dance recital girl. That's fine. And so we went through it all, and he says, oh, and this one is wearing a green dress with red buttons, and he walks with a limp, and this is he had it all designed, and I wrote down everything. I don't know what, I just wrote down everything and listened. And I went away, and I think I'm a pretty fast design when ideas, because as soon as someone starts to talk to me, if it's the right thing, I see images. I just see, it sounds terrible if you say visions, but I see images. And if I don't, I actually turn a show down. It's my little checkpoint. If someone says, hi, David. And I went away. Thought about it, did some designs, brought them back. They were all totally different than what he'd asked for. But what he told me that was so important was the spirit of what was in his mind. And they were they were completely designed. They were drawn, they were colored, they were everything. They were all about 12 by 8. And I saw some the other day because someone took pictures of them from my collection at the Metro Toronto Library. And I hadn't seen them for years. And this person who did it is a young director, or former, he's not that young anymore, but he's one of my former students. And he sort of went, these are really contemporary, because other than the fabrics they were made of, because you had no money, you could do these today and it'd be really fresh. He was really shocked. I said, but good ideas don't get dated, really. Anyway, I showed them to him, and here was Stephen. And I was just dying, right? Because I knew it was different than what he'd asked for. What I'm doing, folks, is I'm smoking and turning pages as I sit there trembling in front of him at the buttery at St. John's, or at St. John's, and Trinity. And then he sat there for a minute smoking. He said, "It's perfect. It's what I always wanted." Phew, I said. And then we were off and running. At first it was just as working friends, and then it became as close friends. And then towards the end of his life, he was my date. I was a Dora juror for the small theaters. Most people didn't know he had AIDS, and he wouldn't let me tell people. After a while you could tell. But it was a time when everyone was terrified, right? And he knew where he got it in New York. He told me. I didn't know what it was, but And so I got 2 tickets to go to about 72 small theater things. And because both of us had come in small theater, and I'd certainly grown up in small theater, I didn't go to a theater school. I didn't go to Stratford. I wasn't trained as an assistant. I've never been an assistant in my life. That's not bad or good. It just haven't been. And except maybe to my mom. And so I said, do you want to be my date? Because he was getting poorer and poorer as well. I think his parents actually did some mortgages on the house to help support him through the last few years. And it was the most transformative time of my life, because not only did I have my friend with me, but for 2 or 3 times a week, we went to a show. And then we'd go out afterwards and have coffee, and he'd tell me what the show was about at his very high level of understanding. And I just listened, you know. And someone once said, why don't you ever want to direct, Mary? And I'd say, because I've always been blessed with really interesting directors. And as long as they keep asking me questions I can't answer, I'm quite happy to let them direct, because I'm not trying to be Robert Wilson, although that'd be fun. And I admire him a lot. And I know why he's doing that. I know why Joachim Freyer, one of my the German designer, producer, writer, artist at 86, started his own company so he could get his ideas out. I get that. But with Stephen, it was... I'm looking back at our correspondences, and Janet Bickford, a great friend of Stephen's who lives in Vancouver, who built props on a lot of our shows, and he lived at her house when he was out there with the Playhouse, assisting Christopher Newton as his... I think he was doing a traveling group from there. And at that time, Don Shipley and Brian Richmond were all there too. And Edgar Doby, who runs the Arena Theater in Washington, was a carpenter. I mean, this is the funny part about all this stuff. We were all babies doing things. And where was I going on that?
The year of Dora, you saw every play. And he was here we went around. And sorry, what do you remember the time period of this? What year was this approximately?
It must have been 88 or 89.
Yeah, right. Just before he died.
I mean, I was also doing Threepenny Opera at that point.
Yeah.
I was doing some of my biggest shows at that point.
I was going to say, because at this point you had done a number of huge projects.
Yeah, I was really lucky.
And yet here you are going to all this small theater and saying that you'd learned still so much about doing theater. I think that's
I don't think it ever stops.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
When my students, if I present anything that I'm saying I'm stuck with or I'm having trouble with or I'm worried about, in terms of something I'm designing or something I'm thinking about, they say, but how can that be so? You've done this for quite a while. You should. I said, well, finding the right solution for any artistic enterprise, whether it's a drawing or it's a huge ballet, is never easy. Sometimes it comes like this, and sometimes you work hard at it. And if you aren't questioning, you're not doing your job. If you aren't collaborating, if you aren't being stimulated by other things that are coming into the factor, if you're just repeating things you've already done, why bother? Bricklayers earn much more than we're going to earn. Let's do that as repetitive action. There's got to be some fun. And the fun for me is that, anyway, Stephen and I would do this, and one of the regrets in my life is... it still bothers me, is that I was up for a couple of Doras for Threepenny Opera that year, and I brought him as my date. And I had this elaborate speech that if I won anything, I was going to do a dedication to him, because he was nearly dead. He was dying. And I got up there, I got so flustered, thanking all the people that had worked with me, I didn't thank him. And that would have been the moment to have given him that honor. Because all the shows we did were pre-Doras. Or they would have won them because they were interesting and experimental. And we did a 9-man Pericles in 1969 at the Glenmorris Church. David Klausner was in it. And it was all done with garbage and kitchenware and odd things. And each country he went to was a different time period and a different color. So that people had hair made out of sponges and garbage bags. For some reason I liked doing that. I'm a sculptor. It was fun. And I think it was Nathan Cohen, or was it Urjo, said it was more interesting than the one at Stratford that summer. Stephen was really good. He did the set for that too. but 9 men. I mean, I listen with laughter to all this confusion about cross-dressing and da-da-da and cross-casting. And he did that right off the bat. And I don't say we did it because that was purely him. And I followed along happily, tail wagging, oh boy, this is fun. I have far more opinionated approaches now. But at the time, if I have a director that's, my mother married my father because she could follow him when they were dancing. She was a really good dancer. And most men dancing with her, when they'd hear she was a dance teacher, would start to stumble over their feet. Dad, it didn't bother. He just said, great, and kept dancing. and for me, I need a good dance partner. I'm a really good dancer, and I need an equal. And if I have an equal, I am so willing to be a handmaiden or to be certainly a collaborator. I won't put my elbows out and be pushy. If I don't, I'll envision the whole damn thing, and they'll stage my shows. And Brian Richmond laughs about that because we're teaching a course right now about the director-designer relationship that we fought to have in for a long time. Because it's a real bête noire for me that directors aren't trained as thoroughly as designers, with a few major exceptions. Absolutely. I don't mean that to sound hoity-toity. But I think every designer will nod their heads when they're saying this, that how come we're the ones that are supposed to know how to read a script, how to understand the psychological implications of this, that, and the other thing, how to understand space and this, and the director doesn't know I have to have any visual memory? You see, Stephen did. He was lovely to work with for that reason. And Grossman did too, or was willing to be introduced to topics if he wasn't familiar with them. My early meetings with directors, once I started doing things with people other than Stephen, and I certainly did right away, was basically I'd have them at my house, because we didn't have computers then, and I'd just pull out books and say, what about if we worked with this kind of a idea or style, or do you like? Because I did an awful lot of instruction. And that wasn't because I thought my way was right. It's just I had a larger grocery store to pull from than they did, and did they want to play this way? There's only one director that I couldn't work with. We were talking about people we can or we can't, and that was Paul Bettis. And Stephen was supposed to have designed that show, and he gave me to Paul instead. It was just way at the beginning when we were doing these things. And it was Les Juste. And I thought, I did some really nice period drawings for him, and, just for costumes. And we just couldn't connect. It just didn't work. And so finally I said to Stephen, I don't know what's wrong. I really like him. He's so intelligent. I love the work he does. But I just get the feeling he doesn't like me or doesn't like my work or something. Could you find out what's going on? Because I said, I'm fine. If he doesn't want to work with me, I'm fine. I just don't want this feeling because I'm not used to that. I didn't have any experience, right? Came back and said, no, it's not your problem. You're just the wrong sex. Right. So I said, oh, is that all? He said, no, it isn't the drawings. It isn't the design. And I said, thank you for being so candid. I mean, and I don't mean that in any way against Paul. It was just... It does speak, though, about how much a director and designer have to trust each other.
Yeah. And while we're on that, tell me about Danny Grossman and how you first started working with him. We've talked about TDT and with Astrid. Mm-hmm. And
with Luscombe, yeah.
Yeah, and with TW, with Toronto Workshop Productions and Toronto Dance Theatre. But Danny Grossman is, again, until you mentioned him today, I had forgotten about the great body of work that he had, they had produced, and I had not thought about it for a while. Like, tell me about when you guys first met and when you started working together. And
well, that was a bit like the meeting with Stephen. Mm-hmm. I've been very, I don't mean this in a religious sense. I've been very blessed with certain people I've run into. This was a funny thing. I had, because of my background as a dancer, because I have done so much dancing, and because I'm a sculptor and I think of the body in movement, and I hate leotards, I found that I I went to the National Ballet and met Jerry Eldred, who was running it at that point, and he loved my work, and he was so great. He said, I think we've got to get something going where we're working, and this is with young choreographers and designers. He said, I want you to apply for a Canada Council grant to say you want to transition from theatre design to doing some dance design. And with that money, you can come and work with Ann Ditchburn, James Kadelka, John Elaine, and who was the other one? There was 4 of them who were working at being potential. They were members of the corps or soloists who were working at being potential choreographers. He was so advanced in thinking of how to develop choreographers who were Canadian, designers who were Canadian. I think I was the only designer that was part of this, but maybe because I was uppity enough to go and meet him. And he sent me to New York to meet Ming Cho Lee, the first time Danny and I went there to do a show. And Ming Cho Lee I spent 2 days with him, and he said, oh, you should come here. You could certainly compete here, no problem at all. And that's when I met Bob Fosse, and he wanted to work with me. We spent 4 hours together, and then he died. But sometimes that happens, too. People just die. But anyway, how that happened was one of the choreographers he wanted me to meet was Danny Grossman. And Danny had just been dancing with Toronto Dance Theatre as a guest and decided he wanted to live here, he and his partner Jermaine, who just died 2 years ago after being together for, 56 years? He cruised him in Central Park. Jermaine cruised Danny. And I said, okay. And I had gone to a party where someone pointed out, that's Danny Grossman. And so I didn't approach him there. But Gary said, no, he's just done this new piece that he's working on with Judy Hendon, who came up from the States, who's a psychologist. None of us at the beginning were anything to do with what real dancers or designers were. We were just people who believed and believed in this kind of experimentation. But I went up to York, middle of winter, and he did the first exercises on the ladder piece. But it wasn't white then, and she didn't ever, I mean, I designed those parts, but it was just the ladder and the chair and the 2 of them. And Let's Go Get Stoned, the music. I'd never heard, I'd just seen the Martha Graham stuff, right, which I never really liked. Although I loved Noguchi's, and I never saw anything Astrid had designed, so that doesn't infer anything about Astrid's work. And I liked Noguchi's design for Martha's original stuff, but there was something so now about what Danny was doing, something so angry, funny, because humor is a big thing with his work too, as was with Stephen and mine. And anyway, I schlepped all the way up to York in the middle of winter in the snow, and on the bus and on the, and I sat there and I watched it, and there were other people doing other things, which, and because I was fairly educated about dance, and then he did this, and I was just mesmerized. I thought, I'm not a bad dancer, but if I could dance like he moves the way I would if I could be him. It was like such an immediate, it was sort of like listening to Stephen talk, but it was listening to Danny talk with his body. And I went, oh. I didn't swear then, but it would be holy shit, Anyway, I was just like, okay, he's the one. And went back to the bus stop, and there was Danny sitting in the bus stop. And it was just like that. Old karmic thing, maybe. We started talking, and at the end of the 2 hours waiting for the bus and freezing to death, we talked about how our dance company would have people in it that were all shapes and sizes, some fat, some crippled. They could be in wheelchairs. Everyone needs to dance in the world. Everyone needs to move. He said, ballet training is really good for even the modern dancer, but it's not about our society or our culture today. And so it certainly exploded my brain. And we both then went, and then I I started going to the thrift shops with him, and designing that first show, the one on the ladder, was more work than anything else we ever did. Because you say, you want to put red on her legs? Because it was different than what Paul Taylor had done, and he'd been principal dancer with Paul. And the most athletic, the things he could do. Because, I mean, Danny had a too long torso, shorter legs, a horsey face. I mean, as he said, he's all the things a classical ballet dancer isn't supposed to be, which is what I loved about it and about him. And everyone in his company that eventually joined. Eric was the next one. He was was it Eric or Greg? He was a computer programmer. And then there was another guy who was and they came from the States because they were following little things they'd seen. Like, it was almost like the Pied Piper. And we were all working for nothing. The other thing that was amazing about Danny is that when he did get some money, he had a very strong belief that dancers should not just be shopped out and then put on pogey, in between. That in order to feel like a true artist, you had to be with your company totally. And in order for the choreographer to be able to use you as the models and the structure of his thinking, his choreographic thinking, you had to be there full time. So he gave all the salary to his dancers. He lived in almost poverty. I mean, if you went to visit Jermaine and Danny, they had a grand piano and a bed, and that was it. There was no other furniture. And Danny's just amazing. And anyway, he says, but I have to wear these kind of shoes because I have to get up on my toes, and I have to do this, and I have to do that, and I have to have knee pads because I'm on my knees a lot, and I don't want to break them. And so there was a lot of constrictions, and we did that, and then we went on to do 28 pieces together. One of them at the Paris Opera Ballet, because Nureyev had seen Danny's work and thought he'd be good to be brought over for this Stockhausen thing. And Eric Brunn, who of course was Nureyev's partner, had seen my work and said, well, you should bring Mary then too. But I've never been very professionally oriented. I mean, that was in 83. And it was an enormous hit, our part of the thing. And so was Karen Armitage. She did one too. Carol Armitage. And there was a couple of older ones from Denmark. But we were the new group. And the head of the Paris Opera, the woman who ran it and the man both loved me, said, I will introduce you to all the opera houses of Europe. I will do this, do that, And I said, oh no, I'm going off to New Zealand. My fiance, I mean, I would always turn things down depending on where my heart was at the time, And of course, that one is the man I'm married to now, and we've been together since 83. But we met in Greece on the Acropolis. I was coming back from Prague. And, I mean, that's how all those kind of synchronicities happen.
All right, so let's just, as a couple examples, just to sort of finish up this period in the 1970s with Stephen Katz, your work at the Vancouver Playhouse, where Christopher Newton was artistic director, Mandragora and Caucasian Chalk Circle. So first of all, Mandragora, tell us about why these were remarkable productions that were lauded at the time. Tell me how they changed people's perspective on, what theater could be, and maybe through Christopher Newton's eyes. Like, what was your approach, and why were these important works?
Well, Christopher Newton was the artistic director, and Cameron Porteous was the design director. And I think Stephen was out there working with them as an assistant to the director or another part of it. There was a lot of interesting people out there. And Christopher came to Toronto, and Stephen wanted him to meet me and to look at my portfolio. We had not been allowed on the stages of our own theater, our own regionals. And Stephen and I were not associated with Passe Muraille or TWP. We did a couple of shows at Tarragon, but we were not company people. we worked quite independently, and he dramaturged a lot of things. He actually designed sets in a lot of the smaller theaters as well, at the same time as we were developing our 10 shows. But he just wanted us to work together, and he introduced us, and Christopher, bless him, looked at my work and said, yes, I think that would be good. I think you should come out and do Mandragora. So I was thrilled. I'd never worked in a big theater like that, and I'd never designed a rake, but I decided there was going to be a rake, and there was forced perspective, so I had to bring back all my old drafting ideas, and it was, the whole set was like marquetry. I was sort of because of my art history background and my love of the Renaissance, Lorenzo de Medici. I love Lorenzo de Medici. I wish I'd known him. And the medieval. Both of those were things that were a strength for me, but we abstracted them as well. Mm-hmm. And Stephen was renowned for rewriting things. This was by Machiavelli, right? Mm-hmm. So we had it on the thrust, and there was the big, what's it called? It's in Rome. It's the floor that Michelangelo did up on the hill. It's a big geometric with wonderful ellipses. And so we reproduced that on the floor, and that had scallop shell footlights. And the clothing was in the style of Isabella d'Este, like 1510, 1520. So the silhouettes were definitely that style, but they were interpreted with a lot of texture and fabric in the sense of knitting, crocheting, bows. There was always a redhead. I always like to put a redhead in the show. And the three zanies, who were all the colors of the rainbow and would come and move furniture and change. Because Stephen, both Mandragora and Caucasian, were very stylized in movement, sort of like Meyerhold and constructivism, bioenergetic movement. And you'd sort of say a line, walk, 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 stand, turn to the left, listen to the line, turn front again, say a line. You know, it was very stylized, his movement. Not the other shows, but those two in particular. Because Stephen, like me, we always had to have something we were exploring. Had to be obviously something we were both happy to explore. And we always used to say that at the end of a production, we never knew who came up with what. And to me, that's rather nice. But I still noticed in the press conferences, he'd say, I did this, I did that. And so I took him aside and said, Stephen, the we word. Let's start using the we word, because you and I are festive collaborators on this. And of course, you've gotten off on the ball rolling, done the, deciding what actors, all of that. And of course, that's the he word. But in terms of what the audience actually visually sees, because I think audiences in our day and age, they actually hear with their eyes. I think they've kind of lost the principle of listening, and their eyes give them so much information that the information that we give them from the set and the costumes and the rhythmic movements were really important, because I firmly believe, I love my audience, and I firmly believe that in the first 5 minutes, the design and hopefully the actors, but say it's just music and stuff happening and it's not words yet, have to reach across to the audience and say, come, let me take you across a magic bridge to a special world where we're going to explore something. And that's what I think my designs do when they work. And the music and the lighting. I mean, it's a collaboration of how this works. It's not just the design, but I mean the overall embrace of the audience, invitation to the audience. I think this is so important, just the way I was saying that I believe the ending of the show is so important, to give the audience some kind of completion or question, or let their heart expand. I'm just so interested in how people's hearts react to things. I've been reading a lot of books lately that says the heart is a second brain, and an important one. So when people say drama is superior to musicals, I don't understand that question at all, because I think when I hear music, my heart opens. When I see people move, my cells respond. We're giving the audience a workout. And I mean, Maggie Smith could stand on the stage and recite the Bible and we'd be thrilled, because she has that charismatic energy that she can send across the footlights. Because I've seen her work at Stratford. What an amazing actress. And we have a lot of our own amazing actors too. But I just using that as an example that other people would know. But Mandragora was this very special, funny celebration. And Stephen was so engaged and so involved in it. And it was very successful. It was, Chris says, I think one of the things that was different is that we used color and we used humor. Some of the Brecht scholars were very uppity about this isn't the way the Berliner Ensemble would do it. And basically, I never spoke to any of these people directly, but this is what I heard through academic circles and others. So I mentioned this to Mary Jolliffe, who is, I think, Stephen's godmother. And she was a publicist for the Lincoln Center and for a few others. She was one of Canada's top publicists. And she happened to be out there because she wanted to see our show. She loved following us around. And both sets of parents would follow us around. So my parents and Stephen's parents became very good friends because their kids were, oh, sorry, I'm moving around too much. Their kids were being very, they were proud of us. And, but Mary, I said this to Mary. I said, I've heard these comments. And she said, oh, for heaven's sakes, how provincial. She said, I've seen Brecht's things, and some of them are bright colors. He's written about bright colors in his shows. He's had more than just Caspar Nair as a designer. He's had all sorts of designers. He said the Berliner Ensemble was a certain style, but Brecht was very theatrical. And so she reassured us both that we hadn't just jumped off the cliff. Because color is not something to be afraid of. And in our culture, it is, or it has been. I used to have a Lapland hat that was velvet with ribbons that I wore, with a coat from Afghanistan that was quilted. It was blue with big red roses, and a green Ukrainian scarf. I wore it, and it was right to the ground. And I wore this in Toronto in the winter. I was there for 25 years. And I was at a lecture that Arthur Erickson, the great West Coast architect, was giving. And he was saying that only primitive cultures used color. And he did this whole talk. And finally, I put my hand up, and here I am sitting there looking like a Christmas tree. And I said, I know you really appreciate Japan and the Japanese colors, but that comes out of the rain, and probably BC is the same thing. But let's talk about Norway and snow countries. In the cold, I'm from Winnipeg, I said, color and lights are very encouraging. They are not necessarily the state of a primitive mind. So I said, I'm very insulted by that comment. And we had quite a bit of a contra. And we since had met before he died. We were in different associations together, and we talked and laughed about it. But that was his look. It's a bit the way Canadian design in houses and things is this fad about gray and white and black. I mean, I wear black, but I also have outfits that are all blue or all red because I want a uniform. And I think many people in theater feel that way. But color, I've never understood people's fear of color or laughter.
That's excellent. Okay, so let's transition then to your big spectacle work. Now, you have worked on a few giant spectacles, including Expo 86,
in Vancouver,
which we spoke to Astrid about, but only from her perspective as working from the Ontario kind of delegation or Ontario project, and in the Commonwealth Games. And what year was that again?
Commonwealth Games was 94.
1994. And you also teach at UVic about great spectacles and working on large public.
Yeah.
Right. So first of all, tell us about Expo 86, what your experience was, and then we'll transition into talking about sort of more general spectacles.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I was comfortable on a football stadium or on a big space because of my marching corps work. And Or even my flying work. I like being above and looking at the big picture. I love those pictures where people take of the overheads, see the world from the overhead. I love pattern. And pattern and rhythm are so important to me in my sets, now that I think of it. Flying over, the first time I flew over the prairies and saw the quilt of the prairies, I couldn't stop looking out the window. I think I look at the overview in almost everything in my life. But doing Expo 86 was very interesting because a wonderful man called Norman Hay thought that theater designers should be doing exhibition design. And he had known Astrid's work and my work. And he had the vision and the chutzpah to hire us. And Astrid got Ontario and I got Canada. And in the sense, the Canadian Pavilion. I got the first theatre in the Canadian Pavilion, and she got one of the theatres in the Ontario Pavilion.
Can I just stop you for a second? And because it's probably true that not all of our listenership knows what the point of sort of Expo 86
Expos and
in general, yeah.
Well, the expos are, to me, a chance for artists. Well, first, my definition of art or artist is someone who has a good idea and wants to share it, whether it's about a good widget or it's about a painting or it's about a sculpture. People can be artists as scientists. I think it's Einstein that said something about creative thought was much more important than not technical, but mathematical. And any mathematicians I've met, like Bohm and other people at some of my Buddhist retreats, he came and talked at one. And he said, the same factors I used last year to prove this, I've now used this year to prove something else. It's a creative act. And I like that. I like that a lot. But Norman had the vision to do this. And I was hired to do costumes at first in this particular thing of the Goose and Beaver, two iconic images. And so I did that, and I did a page, and I had these ideas. And before I knew it, I was doing the whole theater. That sometimes happens. I get enthusiastic and I say, this is what I'm seeing. And then I get more to do. Anyway, I worked with the architect because I didn't want a square room. So I got him to put in louvers that we could downlight in the blue world. And then everything had to be connected to thousands and thousands of people going through it safely. So part of the deal was, it's just like fire restrictions we have in theater on the main stages and things, and the fire retardants and the fire curtains, is that since I had this dancing rainbow that went around the whole loop, the carpet was 5 colors of like the water. So there's 5 colors of blue. And there was a whole walkway, and then 2 or 3 or 4 big various size Art Deco lily pads that the cast could come out, walk around, and relate to the audience as the audience did a big circle around them and then went into the next pavilion. Tragically, the next pavilion is the one where the child was killed because of sitting on the father's shoulders.
I'm sorry, I haven't heard of this. What happened? This is something.
It was in the rehearsals before it opened, and they hadn't checked heights, and the guy and they were on something, I gather, that turned, and the child was above the turning, and it broke its neck, and it was terrible.
That's awful. Sorry to make you tell that story, but man, that's terrible.
It was terrible, and there was so many inventive things happening in the Canadian Pavilion, because the Canadian Pavilion, for those who are not familiar, was the, what do they call it now? The hotel with all the sails. Oh,
is it the convention? What is it?
I guess it's a convention center down there. It's the one with all the sails.
Yeah,
it had been built specially for it. And this was the first thing that was ever in it, was the Canadian Pavilion.
In Vancouver, yeah.
Yeah, and so none of this would be in place once the show was over, once Expo 86 was over. But Expo 86 was a B. It wasn't an A Expo. Expo 67 was the last A Expo. And I did a student thing in that, for which actually won me first prize. But Expo 80, so I feel really, I love being in something that is going to reach a lot of people. And so I got very interested in looking at opening ceremonies. One of the best I've ever seen is the Athens Olympics. That was brilliant from a sculptural standpoint. That huge lake that disappeared and all those pieces that opened up and showed the entire history of Greek and Roman Greek scholarship. I was fascinated with that. And it just, that was one of the wonderful ones. But Saipan's one just recently in Rome, in Russia, showing constructivism but he built an entire ceiling that allowed things to fly and move. And that was fascinating to me. The one in Beijing I was more upset about, and no one else seemed to be, because an opening ceremony is a political message. It's propaganda. I mean, I think it was Mayakovsky that says, you make art to hit people with a hammer, like to make them, it's not about pretty things. It's about changing things.
Right.
And although a lot of my stuff is probably being considered fanciful, I firmly follow that concept. So that an expo allows you to do that. A B expo means you are the country giving the expo provides the spaces and you just fit into them and maybe put a facade on the front. An A expo means you actually build your pavilions. Like, this is why we got Buckminster Fuller's dome. Right. This is why we got Fry Otto stretched skin membrane for the German pavilion. I got his book is just, I just love his work. This is why we got Svoboda doing his Laterna Magica. And many, many, many explorations. And so Norval Morisot, the great Norval Morisot, the Picasso of the North, did a big mural. I mean, expos can be wonderful because they share that, as I said about art, it's a great idea that what means to be shared, and it's shared with all of humanity, which is totally against what's going on in our world right now. I mean, not specifically with individuals, but with what's going on. We're in a dangerous, dangerous place. And that was getting the chance to have a voice about talking about Canada. And I was the producer on that particular Goose and Beaver show. And these costumes were amazing. They cost a fortune each one and had mechanical aspects. Piggy the Goose, and they talked about Canada. And we got Andy Jones. I hired him to write. First I asked John Candy, I must admit. But he was in the middle of a film, but he said I would have loved to. But Andy Jones I've been on consults with him, and he's brilliant. And he wrote the most wonderful text and banter, and the actors just loved it because it took on the lumber industry, the politics, I mean, everything, the jokes, the A, and all that. But the Prime Minister and his delegation went through a few days before. I think it was Mulrooney, but I can't remember. So, and they were horrified because they were entertaining the people as they very slowly and stood there. And then the next pavilion opened as they moved out, and then the different rooms, the different theaters in the Canadian Pavilion. Anyway, so it got canceled, and it became thin pablum indeed. And I never saw it, fortunately, because I had to fly to New Zealand at that point. Or was I? No, I had to go and get Big Top opening at the Royal Winnipeg Ballet and then fly to New Zealand. And it was sort of I think I'm glad I didn't see the truncated version that the director had to adjust. But I also designed in that Princess Diana and the Prince came to open the Canadian Pavilion. So I had to design a big rainbow and stuff around it outside. And I like doing stuff like that. But Astrid's was in a big dome a little further away. And to be honest, I never got to walk through it, but I saw good pictures. Yeah. We were just too busy, all of us. We were running.
Sure. And if the listener wants to go back to Astrid Jansen's interview, she talks about the design process and that part of the expo. So from that, though, you had what I think is probably a more profound experience doing the opening ceremonies of the Commonwealth Games. Tell me how you found your way in. First of all, how did you get hired? Mm-hmm. I'm interested in how you sort of found that work, and then how you found your way into sort of creating an expression of our.
Well, it took 3 years.
Yeah.
It was 3 years of work. But how did I find my way into that? As I did mention to you, I had to move out here in 90 because my mother was given 2 months to live. And I was supposed to go to do a show at Covent Garden, and another with Sadler Wells, and another with Jonathan Miller at the old Vic. And Stephen had just died. And I was just getting ready to do this, and then Mum got sick, so I moved out here. And when I was out here, she was still alive. We'd got her into remission, so I was looking around, what could I do out here? I did an Emily Carr piece for Jovette Morisseau, the French-Canadian sculptor and writer. Did a show about Emily Carr. Most transcendent script, and this was the first English one we'd ever done. It was a translation, so it was the first time in English. And Glynis Leishorn was the director on it. Really wonderful experience. It was at the Belfry. Who was in charge? I think Glynis was in charge of the Belfry at that point. I was still going to cancer treatments and chemo treatments with my mother, so my brain was in a few places. And I'd just done Così fan tutte for the opera out here because I would always take anything I could do out here because I could visit my parents in Victoria. But and then I heard Expo was coming, the Commonwealth Games was coming, and I had just seen what they'd done in New Zealand, and I was so moved by the spiritual possibilities as well as the humanistic possibilities of how you can reach millions of people. I think we've met, 10 million, 20, there's a lot of people. It's not as big as an Olympics. The budgets aren't either. It's a very low budget. I think I had $1.5 million.
And you told me earlier about your experience with the New Zealand opening. And I think it's especially important in this case because it was still about that relationship between colonialism and the indigenous Maori people in New Zealand. So tell me about how that experience changed you.
Well, I lived in New Zealand on and off for a couple of years, and there was an exchange, a cultural exchange with a designer I met at the Prague Quadriennale when I was representing Canada in '83, Ian Atkin. And he, like many New Zealanders, wanted some overseas experience. And he said, and then when he found out that I had a New Zealand boyfriend who was finishing his architecture degree, he said, couldn't we work something out here? What about if you come and take over the Mercury Theatre and design that's where I did a Sweeney Todd with 60 people from the opera. Did some really Tosca, a whole bunch of stuff. And met Dorita Hanna, and she assisted me on Sweeney when she was starting to become a theater designer from her architecture degree. And how did I get off on all that? Oh, and so New Zealand was a special place for me, and very sensitive to colonial issues still. And I met this wonderful Maori warrior. Yeah, she was a warrior, is a warrior, Pauline Kingi. And she kind of politicized me about the whole Maori issue. John already was working on his thesis on Maori housing inside inner cities. He was already very, very sensitive about environmental issues and things. But I didn't know that much about the New Zealand Maori. And she gave me books. She said, "You're very naive," and gave me books. And I became horrified when I found some of the issues and the land issues. And Pauline was a lawyer, one of the first Maori women, or Maori period, to study in the States. I don't remember if it was Harvard or whatever, but she had a voice like a cello. So she'd hypnotize people with... Anyway, she was a big influence in me in New Zealand. And we just had left and come back to Canada when they put on their opening ceremonies. So I knew the players, and they'd gotten the person who was the designer, I think, and the artistic director was from a dance group in New Zealand, very experimental Maori dance group. So that was part of the issue for them, was to tell their story to the world. And as I explained to you, it was so moving. John and I were watching it in Toronto. We had, just before we moved, we were watching it in Toronto. And it started with, New Zealand's the land of the long white cloud. So it started with clouds and bird song and filling the stage with blue fabric, and a wonderful sculptural boat came in, and a lot of the Maori legends and things were brought to bear. They sort of really wove a spirit on that stage. And then all of a sudden, in red, white, and blue, came in march music, came in the church, came in military, came in, and they all came in from the four corners and the other four corners of, say, the Union Jack, the flag, making a huge colored Union Jack at this total chaotic sound. It was amazing. And we just said, they're not going to do that. They are going to do that. They're not. They did this. Oh, my God. It was so outrageous. It was so brave, this little tiny mouse that roared. Right? I'm going to tell our story to the world. And I think a lot of New Zealanders were shocked as well. But and then it got to its peak of chaos, and all of a sudden they all just disappeared out the exits. They had much bigger exits than we had to work with. And this one old woman in a long skirt and a babushka, in a kind of a Maori peasant look, just a normal, with her cane, walked out to the center, very slowly to the center of the whole stadium. A pin could drop. And it was Dame Fina Cooper, who was led all the land marches and was a great symbol of Indigenous growth. Because in New Zealand, they were further along than us in terms of Indigenous cooperation and care with each other. There was still the rednecks, but a lot of marriages. Maori were in all the school systems. It was a lot of smaller country, easier to integrate. And as Pauline said, she was the chancellor of Out University as well last time I was there, and she said, we're finding that actually, as Maori, we're actually very good with technology. So we're kind of taking that over. I loved it. And so why, I guess I'm speaking about that in such detail, is that it inspired me to use opening ceremonies as a political and artistic tool. And mostly, I mean, there's a real formula you follow for all these things. There's the entertainment for the athletes. There's the parade of the athletes. There's the parade of the flags. There's the dignitaries. It's all very organized. And but what I saw was in New Zealand, it started the show, and they didn't do any more entertainment factor. That's not the right word. I'm trying to remember what it was. With the main emphasis being on the players, on the sports people, obviously. But the Commonwealth Games is not as big as the Olympics, and it's still about 52 countries, so it's not chopped liver. But and in fact, BBC comes and there's a lot of different places that come and cover it. And after we did our dress rehearsal, the head of the BBC came to me and said, thank you. And I said, why? And he said, for giving us something to shoot. He said, this is much more, your concept of a story that integrates the entire opening ceremonies is much more of an Olympic look. And I told him how much we'd spent on it, and he was just floored. It was really fun. Because I come from poor theater. I'm used to making things work on a low budget. But the story about how that happened, Ed Oscapella was the producing, he wasn't the production manager, but he was the one who was the head producer. And he was in town, and I guess I was sitting there twiddling my thumbs, watching my mom and going to chemo treatments. And I heard that they were bringing this in a couple of years ahead of time. And so I approached him. I said, hey, I'm in town. I'd be good to do this. blink, blink, blink. And he knew my work. And he was very interested in that. He says, well, we're thinking also of working with Jacques Lemay. And I said, well, we've done a lot of shows together. He's certainly comfortable in making people move and moving things around. He's not afraid of my design. And so we were both semi-hired because to get the Olympic bid or to get the Commonwealth bid, they had to do a premise. And the premise was they were going to do it in that very harbor where you landed. Yeah. Could it be, and that's what they sold it on. Right. So I was supposed to do an analysis to find out if that would work. Right. And Jacques and I talked about some ideas, but it was mainly about the physical analysis. Where would they sit? Where would people, where would they park? How would we get this on? I proposed a whole water opening, everything on the opening, and I wanted the First Nations who do, BC First Nations have the most amazing canoes, the Salish and the Quaguth and the various, and it was tying into what they ultimately did was a whole canoe trip down the west coast, ending up in the harbor and so I was trying to tie that together, and without working with any First Nations people yet at that point, because this was just do some drawings, put it in, say that you can actually do it now that we've got it. Well, we said no, you could, but you couldn't. So it moved to the stadium at that point, and then we seemed to carry on. It was tricky because Jacques was in charge of Charlottetown that summer. So he was mostly away, and we communicated by fax and by telephone and things. But I had a lot of feelings because of New Zealand and what they were doing. And my experience with expos, just about the window to the world. And how could we share our culture? And one of the things that really moved me about New Zealand was that a country that's proud of itself or that's confident in itself, as I said before, they laugh at themselves, but they also know whose shoulders they're standing on. And they also honor the people that were there before them. Like with Pauline, at one stage I said, so, have the Maori always been here? And she says, oh no, there was someone here before us, another culture. They might have come from Hawaii. And I said, so where were they when the Maori supposedly came in the 1400s? And she said, oh, we ate them. I said, well, in a way, the white person is eating you. She didn't talk to me for 2 months. But it just the way my brain worked. Well, and I didn't mean it was a good thing. It was just, think of the Mongolian hordes going back and forth through Europe, trampling all these different countries and destroying them.
When we look at the, I'm doing a lot of reading right now on the Indian Act and the 60 Scoop and things like that. And the supplanting of Indigenous culture and the full assimilation into the colonial culture was the point. Certainly in Canada, was to eliminate that culture by subsuming it, by consuming it, by
same with New Zealand, only they just wanted to kill them there.
Right.
But and it was because this was the political, it happened in India, it happened everywhere they went, the Great British Hand. They've done it to our theaters too. That's a whole other issue of something I'm working on right now. But it's just very intriguing to me that I guess I felt once we had the show, I felt very strongly that we had to have a First Nations component that was an equal partner with us. Very strongly about this. It wasn't everybody's cup of tea, so it took a certain amount of discussing and convincing. Interesting sidebar was Chief Adam Dick, the Quaguth chief that is Quaxi Stala and has just died at the age of 90 and is one of the last 4 hereditary Quaguth chiefs from Alert Bay, and could do a 12-day potlatch in the old language because when this whole system of taking everyone and putting the kids in the thing, his shaman grandfather hid him away in the forest. He did not go. So, as he said to me once, he said, this is why I talk like a an ignorant Indian. I never learned to talk English. I didn't have to go to the school. They think I'm just a dumb fisherman. And Kim, his partner, who's educated in chief as well, or was at the time, and very culturally a teacher. The two of them have done films, it's very important. He was kept in the forest. He said, yes, but Adam can speak the old language for 12 days in a row and knows that the potlatch is a judicial system as well as a social system. And he's like, she said, he's speaking the equivalent of classical Greek. But the white person doesn't know this. So it was just an amazing journey with these two wonderful people who became good friends. And Kim and I are talking about, writing about our experience in creating this creation legend of Kabadilikala, and why it seemed to work so well for us when so many people are talking about appropriation and not working well together. Why is that happening? Why did ours work? Her answer when I was speaking about it on the phone was, she said, well, it's because we took it to a higher level. We worked for the good. We weren't trying to push an Indian agenda or a white agenda. We were talking about taking it to the higher level of respect for the benefit of all.
Yeah,
I like that.
Yeah, it wasn't a commodification.
No.
It was about communicating a message. And sorry, this is Kim.
Kim Rakama-Klutasi, her name is.
Okay.
And interesting woman. Her mother was Icelandic. Her father was a chief. And her brother is now the chief of that area in Qualicum. And I re-met him just recently at the burning ceremony for Chief Adam, because they were ritualists and it really mattered. And the interesting thing was that the first time I flew to New Zealand, when we landed in Auckland, a whole group of people got up, put on ceremonial Quag robes and headdresses and feathers, and departed. Adam and I found that was Adam. We were both on the same plane back in 86. I mean, there's a lot of synchronicities between me helping to tell the story. And I was just so strong, we offered it first to the Salish because it's their land and it's their stories to tell here. And I went to about 3 people and they, oh, no. We do our work very privately. We're not the performers. But our Quaggy with brothers are much more open to that. And they were kind of laughing, to be honest. I didn't know any of that at the time. I'm so naive. I just, okay. And so I think it was Jacques that found Kim at an interview, and he said maybe she'd be the way in. So, because by then he was on board with all that too. And she came to my house. We sat in the dining room, and she vetted me. She read me. And at the end of it, she said, I'd like you to meet Adam. And so we were invited to their home. And before I left, I went into the garden. I had quite a herb garden for healing things, and because it's always interested me. And I picked a bunch of herbs, and I took it with me and gave it to them as a present, which seemed to please him quite a bit. It was just an intuitive thing. Sure. And we talked for quite a while. He'd just come through heart surgery. My God. And he was more quiet. She's more loquacious. She's gone to university. She's been a consultant to Chrétien. She's a consultant in Manitoba. She's a very quiet, behind the scenes, learned woman, and just lovely, so intelligent. They both were, but he's hidden behind his upbringing. I will look down. I will do, But so we talked for about 2 or 3 hours, and then he sort of went with his eyes to Kim, and she disappeared into another room and came out and brought his cape, his feathers, and a roll of paper. And he did a whole ceremony around me, just about. And he said, "This is the most sacred legend and the earliest of our people. I'm entrusting this to you to tell our story." And I still get my goosebumps because the ancestors are always present. It was just a high point of my whole life. So off we go, and working and talking, and because Adam had grown up in the big house, and it was a book that never got to be written. Maybe Kim will write it. But his grandfather, there were traps all under the big house. There was all these alleys. And as a kid, he would crawl through with a bladder full of blood, and under the fire, at the right moment, he'd go, whoo, and the blood would fly up, and everyone would go, ah! And the shells on their costumes under the lamplight and the firelight would glitter like sequins. And they also had flying rigs. Things would come across and be dropped. And they'd have certain things they could throw in the fire that would make it pop. I mean, so John was going to draft it all up, and we were going to try and write a bit of a book. I had no idea the big house had that potential of the playhouse. We come from these people, and we, in whatever country, everyone, I was just floored. It was so amazing. But so we worked together on a lot of things because they were very aware of the scale. I'm really comfortable in big scale and moving through stage space. I love perspective and points of view and breaking the proscenium and all sorts of things that I've done often. But this was one where we had to do it in the round. We had to do it in daylight in order to hit the broadcasting of the European thing. We had to start at 4 p.m. I did not have the illusion of lighting that many, many opening ceremonies, Commonwealth or Olympic, count on. So it was like, here we are, we're doing children's theater again, which I did a huge amount growing up when I first started designing in Toronto. And we're doing it in gym lighting. But that's okay. That's where color comes in and scale. And thousands of people moving things. So I made a huge board in the front room that just totally scaled the whole thing. And I worked out all the different possibilities, what the scale was. And I'd take pictures of it, and Jacques would come over and I'd say, look, I think this could go to here and that. What do you think? He said, well, what about if they could go here? And, so we worked out the kinetics. Yeah. But the First Nations, I made it the centerpiece. We spent most of the money, 2/3 of the money on that, because it had a huge walking wolf. There was about 30 feet by 25, and it was operated by 60 people, and it just walked. And Andrew Wallace was the brains behind that. He was one of my props builders from Shaw. He was a scientist. And one day, I got Bryn Finer to, I talked him into being the technical director, because it took about 6-8 months to build this thing in a big factory, a warehouse out in Saanich. And there was quite a few challenges, partly because I was ignorant of certain things. First time I've done it, it's a very small club, people that do opening ceremonies. And you're kind of learning as you go along. We had a lot of people help us from UVic, which I wasn't part of at the time. And a lot of people came in, and Kim and Adam came and painted. They also came, and they helped the people making, the artists and the people making everything, to understand the gravity of the situation. And they explained who they were, and they explained the legend, and they explained the ancestors, and they explained how important. And so everyone was just there. Whoa, it was just a team. And we had these 4 big totems that were carved in the shape. I showed you his father's house. They were carved in what he had as a picture of his father's totems. And I put them on little tiny tractors, and had big cedar tree, four panels, or was it 5 or 6 panels, transparent with patterning that Adam approved. And they moved around in the creation part, and then they dropped them down and made a big house at the end. The walls of the big house were made, I was going to do structure and anything, but my sort of idea was to get the Queen to come into the big house, meet them both in there, and give her address there. Mm-hmm. Like, to get when Marie, whoever the person who came, brought the message in the thing. And so the way I got around the Secret Service in Buckingham Palace, because it was a huge thing, was I said, well, could they be humans? So I decided it was the women and the children who became the walls of the big house, because they're the future. But it was a huge amount of drawings, but this huge wolf and these 4 cedar trees, and the wolf had to come out of the mountain and give birth to the 4 children of Cowadillica and the other 3. And so this mountain, because we had to get through the stadium doors, they weren't wide, had to come, it was like about 12 feet by 12 feet by 12. And then, so we had someone in the center putting the pole up, and then all the other people running out, and it was in different shaped patterns. This was another thing that Andrew worked out. I mean, I designed it and drew it, but he made it happen. And Andrew Wallace, I should bring back that this is Victoria Wallace's brother. And Victoria had been an assistant of mine at one stage, very talented woman. But Andrew just arrived in a pickup truck one day. I said, Andrew, what do you do? Because he did my props for several of my shows at Shaw. And he said, with his broken tooth and his glasses falling out, and he sort of said, understand you're doing something impossible out here. Thought you might need me. Loved it. Just so neat. And Bryn said, hi, Andrew, okay. You know, because Andrew's just a master. He just slept in his truck, and he did all the aluminum welding of the wolf's head, and I think I showed you pictures of it, and the mouth had to open and hold the ball of Quela, which is spirit, and all these legs had to work. We used my dog, another dog I had at the time, as a symbol. And this thing walked around the stadium. I showed it. I took these pictures, just as an aside. I took these down. I can't remember his name. Michael somebody, who did the props for Lion King, and whose firm down in Portland or outside of Portland does all those. And I wanted to meet him. I wanted to show him what we'd done. I thought, maybe I can design something for him. And the words were, how did you do this with just people? He was just floored that we had the nerve to do it. He said, you've just seen what's in here. I've done a small bear that's fully mechanical. And he did a bear for, I think, the Olympics in Vancouver. That's a whole other story. And he was just floored by the wolf and by these huge 26-foot dolls, and I had all what I call petal children. They were geometric patterns that you'd rarely see on TV because they were the transitions to other things. And I wanted the audience to have a good time in the stadium as well as on the... And that seemed to floor people, that was even thought of. So I put on a big show. And we created all these patterns, Jacques and I, and it was quite wonderful how... But they were all forms of that Bryn got made of metal painted white in different shapes. There were circles, there were clover leaves, there were triangles, and there were ellipses. And if you put them together, they make Art Deco stencil patterns. And they filled the whole stage. When we had a lot of transitions, the kids would all just, 500 of them, run out. Everyone was dressed in green, so they matched. And they would run out, and off they'd go and make these patterns. And as Michael said, but what about wind? Because this isn't an enclosed. And I said, we would have been toast. Because little Griselda would have been hanging on, flying to Nanaimo, saying, bye, Mummy. And so we were risking that. But But Adam took care of that. The wind was making all the flags go at a total right angle as we started into the ceremony, and as it all started. Ladies and gentlemen, the 1990, that type of thing. And I said, what are we going to do? And Kim said, just wait. And he was going. And they all just went. And when we finished, at the end, we made this huge bird of peace made out of umbrellas and people singing. And the tail feathers was the rainbow bird that I've done as a symbol for my own artwork since, I was about 18. They all had these backpacks with ripstop nylon. Oh, we spent a lot of money on ripstop nylon. And they all ran out and made this huge rainbow tail. And the eye in the sky, Goodwill Blimp, was taking it because I wanted this picture. And Richard Margerson was in the eye of the bird singing. He's such a good sport. He's been in some of my operas. And that happened, Let Your Spirit Take Flight. And then the drum beat started. It was the finale. Here's this finale we're talking about. And they changed all the umbrellas to black, white, and red and patterns. And I had a Salish artist up Island, because it's Salish land, do a Salish Thunderbird pattern that we then made happen with the umbrellas and more ripstop nylon tail feathers. So this beautiful dove, boom, 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 and it changed because it was the Salish Thunderbird of striving and athletic genius, And so that changed, and the audience was just like, even in daylight, it was pretty good because it filled the whole it filled the whole thing. And the 4 totem poles were at the corners, so making the whole stage the big house. You are watching the big house here. And at that point, the planes flew over the... what are they called?
The Canadian...
Yeah, that group.
Snowbirds.
Snowbirds.
Yeah.
And we were at the end, and then all the flags went up again. The wind came back instantly. Right. But our wolf was saved, our mountain, our huge mountain was saved, all of these other elements were saved. We had salmon, we had a whole globe of connecting the world, because the legend of Cowadillica is amazing. It's about this wolf comes out of the mountain, and it's the mountain just up island. I mean, Adam would show me where, he said, this is where it came from, and this is where the water came, and it's very real. And I accept that concept easily. And I showed him all the different plans of how this could be actualized, the story he'd given me, and he looked at it and spent quite a bit of time looking at it. He was quite happy with it. He was quite happy with it. Because it, as Kim said, we don't do this in the big house. We don't have salmon. We don't have other things. And there were seagulls, there was deer, it was about the creation. But out of the wolf came these 4 huge puppets operated by 3 people. And they were all painted in ripstop, someone in the center, someone holding the arms. And they had, as the story was spoken, it was spoken by Kim, she wrote it, from the original, from the First Nations language. We watched them, and it's really the legend about how it's the story. It's the Tower of Babel. It's how you divided the nation into different languages. So all 4 sent this. They were playing with this ball of quaila, and I'd ask Adam, "What does quaila mean?" He says, "Everything. It's spirit. It's everything." And they had to play toss with this for a while, and in it came a sauciutal. I probably can't say it right anymore, but it's a wonderful creature that can fly and can swim and is almost like a canoe. And it took them all on a huge ride around. It actually did in a CBC cameraman who got in the way, because it was like a Chinese dragon, but very big with 2 tails, and it was all moving around. And we had sun and moon symbols, and it was really interesting. And what happens is that they blow the quaila around, and we had little puffballs of ripstop myelin under which were hidden many of the different cultures of Victoria and Vancouver Island, Ukrainian, da-da-da-da. And once this had been pushed around, they opened up and the wolf moved around, all that. It was really giving birth to all the nations. So it suddenly tied everything else in, and then all the flags came in and all the countries came in. And it was kind of like, this is how we see it in Canada, how all of you have been created. Yeah. Yeah. It was lovely. And, but it carried, and then I'm trying to think which the order was now, if it was the Queen. But all the trees became the totems, and his father's great shields came out at the back, and all the women came on. And about 50 or 60 First Nations and Salish and all came in. And there was a fire. We put a fire. It was not a real fire, but and the Queen came out of the stadium for the first time in history and walked in to the big house beside Adam and Kim, because he called all the nations, Helikasta, Helikasta, a wonderful singer. She came in, and they called in a way the spirits of the world, and then the Queen did the same thing. We got so many heartbreaking letters from Aboriginal people all over the world. Chief Adam did, but they shared them with me, about how did you get your country to admit that you're alive? Our countries have thought we were dead for years. How did you get your country to tell your story? It was really interesting. I mean, not something I'd expected. But Kim said to the day that Adam died, he believed he had potlatched with the world. And of course, as soon as I thought about it, of course he did. Of course that's what we did. And as I say, her letter, which might be released at some time, and I won't read it now because it's pretty personal for this particular thing that she wrote it for. But it was really, she felt that the whole work about Indigenous understanding started with our games.
And it's certainly with we can't say the work is obviously over, because there's lots of promises that were made that were never kept and have not been kept yet.
No, it's on the way, but it's not...
But it's remarkable that can. I think it's a lesson that it can happen, and that's a relationship we should probably strive for. I have to find a way to talk to, or to find Indigenous artists to invite them on the show to talk about the other, like the older, the original, like expressive and public.
It's too bad Adam
theatrical
died. He would have
arts,
been
right?
a good person to talk to, because he performed it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
But there are people who, but even Adam and Kim, one of their sadnesses was that the young people don't want to. I understand that. I went to art school and I didn't want to do Rembrandt. Yeah. I could do that, but I didn't want to. I wanted to do abstraction. I think Kim and Adam were just concerned that it would get lost because there's no tangible history. Mm-hmm. So that's why they've done films on, this is what I do with cedar bark, this is what I do with these herbs. The only way Adam lived to be 90 was the amazing things that Kim was able to help him with from medicine, Indian medicine, as she'd call it.
Okay. Well, let's take a moment then to land and transition to, I think, our final kind of conversation, which is going to be about, you would want to talk about theater as art and a defense of the premise. And this is something, I just want to harken back to what Robert Gardner spoke about with me a few days ago now, would have been the last episode, or 2 episodes ago, where he was talking about the struggle as an educator, as an academic, to prove to the rest of academe and to the granting agencies and the people who support sort of academic research that theater practice is, that is his work, and it should be seen in the same light as an academic research paper or scientific research. And I think along the same lines, we had this divide between theater and perhaps, we call it the fine arts, and we call it theatrical arts. Like there's some sort of divide there that someone has devised.
Yeah.
So explain to me why we need to maybe remove that divide, or how you see that kind of practice.
Well, that's a really good question, an interesting question. I've taught here for 20 years now, since I had to move out here. But in the early days, to pay my bills, I taught at Ryerson, I taught at York, I taught at Waterloo as a set and costume designer, and at Photo Arts, interior design. Wherever I could talk about art. And I think I'm in a strange position. I'm not sure it's a privileged position compared to some theater design, or many theater designers, because I haven't gone through a theater school and I haven't learned it in that way. And my whole future, as far as I was concerned, was going to be a sculptor. There weren't many women sculptors at the time. There was Lee Bonteseau and Marisol and Louise Nevelson, but they were considered kind of freaks. And I was in my school too. It would be like Joey Fafard was there at the same time, who does all the cows and stuff, right? Really interesting artist and a good friend. And I was the only woman. No, there was one other woman, but I think I was the only one that was carrying on with it. So, of course, I had to do the biggest sculpture, and I had to do all the welding, and I had to do this to show that I was a sculptor, right? But I remember once I was moving my sculptures from one gallery to another in my thesis year, and one of the big tall ones started to tip and fall as I was pulling and there were some of my classmates, there was only a few of us, but standing there, and they didn't stop it. They just says, "Oh, is it a bit too heavy for a nice little girl like you?" I've run into that all my life as a theater designer. Especially when I was, Astrid was the only other person who was doing set and costumes the way I was. And I don't understand this separation. I suppose something should have twigged that when I was at art school, there were no women professors. There were no women sculptors. There was no one. But I still sort of thrilled when they said, "You make art like a man." So there's a whole other issue here about women and feminism and Me Too, and my great-grandmother, who was a novelist who was never published, who I'm going to try and get published in the 1860s. She wrote up in Northern Ontario about being in the woods. She wasn't heard either. So it's an issue. I've been awfully lucky. I've done nearly 300 shows. I've won a lot of awards. I've had a certain amount of honors and respect. I've had some wonderful students. They're my best lineage, actually. And I've fought the last 20 years, if not much longer, but the last 20 years in academia, to have just what you just said, to have the art we do up there considered practice, artistic practice. But more importantly, I've always said I'm not a theater designer. I'm a sculptor who does kinetics. I do kinetic sculpture on stage. I don't know if that's just because I'm a dancer and I like to see everything in motion all the time. My sets move. They do things. I was thinking the other day, if I was like in my late 20s and having a certain amount of control and power and possibility with collaborators and directors who want it to work that way, what would I be engaged in that would be new? Because I always wanted to be doing something no one else was doing. I don't think I did it intentionally. It was just all I could do. It was the best I could do. Milton Glasser, the great graphic artist in New York, is one of my idols. I think he's in his 90s now. He did the iconic I Love New York, but he also did that Bob Dylan portrait, and he ran Pushpin Studios, and I just love graphic art as an immediate way of connecting with people. His drawings moved. He could do realism. He could do anything. So I figured theater could do this too. And as an art form, it was a wonderful place of expression, because it's only been recently that artists have been excluded from theater. Like artists with quotes, such as Picasso did for the theater, Cocteau did. you look at I'm a great fan of constructivism, Russian constructivism, Goncharova, Popova, Exter, all of the production designers at that time were women. This is interesting to me. Leon Bax did rather bad sets, but extraordinary costumes. It was a time of such change, and the women were leading it with Mayakovsky, with Meyerhold. I mean, when we did, John Willett was our consultant on Threepenny Opera, and of course it was a great deconstructive explosion of a city space, of the walls falling in, and the people, that music. I mean, when you design something like that, if there's music, you have to design for the music, not the text. Because the audience won't hear the text. They'll only hear what the music makes their heart feel. And so the musician in me wants to approach it that way. And John Willett, I said when it opened up, I said, so would Mr. Brecht have liked it? Because he's a great Brecht scholar. He knew Brecht. He said, oh, no, he would have hated it. He said, but Meyerhold would have worshipped you. Right. I said, who's Meyerhold? He said, you don't know who Meyerhold is. I said, no. I didn't go to a theater school. And we were at Banff, and he said, there's a really good library downstairs. I suggest you go there right now. And I brought all these books up. I read all night, and I kept thinking, this is exactly what Stephen and I were doing. This is what Stephen and I were talking about. This is the bioenergetic movement. This is exactly what I was beside myself. And the next day I went to him and said, because I was so innocent, and I was so ignorant. I was just ignorant. And he and I became good friends. And he's the one that sponsored me in England and introduced me to all those people. Like John Cox, who was running Covent Garden, said, I'm only seeing you, he was about 6'5", because my good friend John told me I had to. I have about 10 minutes. I don't hire people from the Commonwealth. And I went, okay. And I showed him some work, and that kept me there for 3 hours, and he offered me a show at the end and said, you're young David Hockney. I've always said to my students, you have to be able to talk about your work and your ideas. Because he said, well, I'm surprised to be saying this, but, I'm very entertained by talking with you. Because a director wants someone who's a playmate. They want someone who's an equal in ideas and talking, not just someone who says, yeah, I think I'll draw something. They want someone who's articulate. And anyway, we had a lot of fun. And I said, you got one of the things we do up here, because I insist that my students have a chance to design on the main stage. I used to have to do a certain amount, but I've tried to change that so my students who are paying the thing, and I supervise them. I'm the fly on the wall. I don't leave them by themselves, but they have to do a portfolio review with whoever the directors are the next year, and the directors choose with my consultation, so that I don't put them in over their heads. And because the more you audition, the better you will be at getting a job. I worry about my students getting a job. I very much worry in the world today, and unless they just want to be dog's bodies. But if they're creative artists, some of my best students come from visual arts, but visual arts will not accept the art I do and that all of us do as the same. And I'm in a kind of interesting position that I can shout that down. Because say, look, I came through this. I am a sculptor. I understand that because I'm often on thesis committees. And that must be John coming home. And I'm often on thesis committees. And I just say, because I can bring in a different kind of an approach. And they'll often put something in the middle of the room for a sculpture and say, and I'll say, well, at the preliminaries when we're meeting, and I'll say, well, wouldn't you want to, if it's in the room, what about putting something on the walls? What about hiding this? What about integrating it? And one of the teachers said, Mary, this is art, not theater design. It's not the same thing. And I said, well, it is actually. We're not going to talk about it here in front of the student, but you and I are going to have a discussion. Because I can give you a lot of good examples of how artists like to work in theater, because Okay, here's another story about art and theater, is that when I was made a member of the RCA, which isn't the Royal Society, it's that other one, and I was at a crisis point in my life where I wondered if I'd wasted my life doing theater when all my teachers at the art school had thought I should be doing sculpture and painting, that I was the Great White Hope, and I'd gone off into theater. So I met with Ivan Eyre, who was one of my great mentors and a wonderful painter in Winnipeg, who's not given as much credit as he should. He's had shows at the National Gallery, and he's very internationally known, but unfortunately he has Parkinson's now, and he's one of the most amazing graphic art. But I sort of said, can I talk? He was a very privately reclusive man. I said, can I talk to you? He said, okay, well, I'm here. And he said, sure, what is it? And he said, well, I said, I need advice. And he looked, Anyway, we met and talked, and I said, I'm really wondering if I wasted my life and my potential. It was as serious as that. So he had that particular book, the blue one I was showing you, and he went through it, I was just dying. It was sort of like the Stephen going through the drawings. I was just dying because his opinion mattered to me. And he finished and he said, why would you say that? These are works of art. Your costumes are astonishing. Your set, they're moving. And you've got all these people to help you make your art. Basically, I mean, I'm not paraphrasing him, but he was saying, so what's not to love, you should not be pulling yourself apart about this. But I was so afraid I'd sort of let someone down. And isn't that funny? And it didn't hit me as much until I came there, back in Winnipeg at the art gallery where we were inducting us. And, something in me just sort of went, oh dear. This has been fun, but I was destroyed. It's never kept. Yeah. So I've gone to a few art galleries and said, I really think you should display artwork. I think Susan's had something at Stratford at one of their galleries. I've had at the Legacy, I shared a gallery show with Morso, and the work we did on how it was put on at the National Art Centre, and a tape and a model, and it was really kind of nice, and all my drawings and all my models. And
Kim Porteous has had a show that I think toured actually to a couple different venues.
Cam?
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it started in Niagara, and then I think it went someplace else. But yeah, it's the same kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that kind of thing helps us to legitimize the work. It's still not the same as a separate object sitting there perfectly. The charioteer at Delphi. When you walk and see that thing, it's unique.
Well, and also I think, excuse me, my goodness. I also wanted to say as well that theater, one of the things, when we look at a lot of installation artists that have tried to incorporate video or kinetics into their sculpture, or start to take up whole rooms with an experience where the audience is immersive, like they're trying to capture something that theater does all the time.
And does well.
And they're trying to incorporate theatricality. I know. And almost as if they realize something is missing, or they realize that there is something outside of the static slice of time that they create. And theater is not that. Theater is a temporal art. No matter how, even if it's someone sitting there, in the park and bark thing in a static set, it's still the words and the music and the rhythm and the tone bring us through time.
It's repetitive action unless it's something out, unless it's a invention each night.
Yeah. And we can't, you can't recreate it. You can't put that in a museum.
No.
And in fact, I think if you put a theatrical piece in a museum, it becomes something different. It's a different context for that as well. And so it's hard to sort of present the work that way, even though I think it should be.
Well, I think we can only show the remnants of what our creation was when it was fully embodied, because I consider what we do embodiment. It was fully in the body of the actors, in the body of the technicians running it, in the body, and every night it's embodied. And movement, this is why movement is so important to me, because I think that's something that distinguishes us from it. I have a big problem with a lot of stuff that's happening in the art world these days, and where there's more dialogue about it than the object. And this might be me being old-fashioned, I don't know. But gallery work, theater work, it's changing beneath our feet as fast as we can go. And my theories, and this is partly because of my earlier experience with computers and my constant study of McLuhan and technology and the ideas of what's going on, is that the last 10 years, maybe, since everyone has a cell phone, we have moved from a three-dimensional universe to a two-dimensional one. And that means the audience, too. And although I believe Canada has some absolutely amazing theatrical artists, if the audience isn't their equal, this is what we talked about with collaboration earlier. If you're not collaborating with an equal, you're not collaborating. You're adjusting, or you're tickling them under the chin, or you're trying to make something, but you're not collaborating. And it's the same if your audience isn't. When Mirvish wanted to see Bella, this show that I wrote with Teresa Tova about Marc Chagall's wife, he invited us to Toronto for a backers audition. The backers didn't like us. Like, his people didn't. He and his wife loved us. They didn't like. But he gave me tickets. He and Danny Grossman. Danny was the director for this. And he gave us tickets to Warhorse. Right in the front row. I was just gobsmacked. I was just fascinated. Rick McMillan, that's who I was trying to remember. Who was my student at that. But Rick was playing in it. And this horse, I was in tears when the baby horse turned into the huge Clydesdale and then charged down into the audience and out. I was crying my eyes out. Two girls beside me who looked about 18 were totally engrossed in their cell phones. I said, could you turn that off, please? Why? The light is bothering me. And they were in the second row. They didn't see anything of the show. And I suddenly thought, we're not in Kansas anymore, Toto. I think about this a lot. I've thought about it ever since I could see the encroachment of the computer and what it does to our brain. I look at brain studies a lot about how things are working, because it's our role as designers and directors and everyone in theater to know how to reach an audience. And projections don't do it. They're fascinating, but they're terrible in dance because you don't watch the person. It's not enough to then put the person up on a screen. We could just be sitting in a movie theater. Sorry, I want to hear them breathe. I might be old-fashioned about that, but I feel it's our job to explore. So of course projections will be. I've put projections on some of but I've limited them to certain areas. And I'm very concerned about how an audience perceives things and how our young theater artists and students are perceiving things. And this also goes into visual arts, because if we just think of ourselves in a flat world, we don't need to have dimension on stage. We don't need to have any of the wonderful stage tricks of the 16 and 1700s that inspired me to do Stag King and to do Mandrag and they were all because of these mechanical theaters, that you could do things like a puppet. And that doesn't mean anyone else has to do that. It just means it interested me. And we look at our culture. We can only design from the culture we're in, but we have to know it in order to reach an audience. It's not enough to just say, I'm fascinated with this design idea or this technical idea or this sonic idea. Somehow it has to be something that's going to reach the audience and change their souls and their minds. And they're certainly paying a lot of money now to go for tickets. So, it's like, But
it is interesting. I just want to stop you for a second. It
Sure.
is interesting that you teach a course called Learning to See? No.
Ways of Seeing.
Ways of Seeing.
A tip of the hat to John Berger, the great
Right.
John Berger, who just died
Right.
last year, I guess.
And I've heard tell of stories of people going to see theater, live theater, three-dimensional theater, who see it as two-dimensional.
That's right.
And interact with it in the same way they react with a film.
Yeah.
Speaking out, talking to their friends, watching on their phone, whatever, to taking pictures.
That's right.
And
it's interesting. That's what I mean about the audience being trained as well.
well, you all, yeah, because you like we can look at it and go, well, it's obviously three-dimensional. Like to us, it's obviously three-dimensional. But you have to.
They're just taking pictures.
Yeah, you have to like. It's mediated through the phone. Like, it's why people take videos of concerts. Like, why are you taking videos of concerts? Like, it's the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And
it's a big concern.
It is like I think we have to at least appreciate the idea that what they're seeing is two-dimensional. Even though the stimulus may be three-dimensional, their decoding of it in their brain might be two-dimensional.
Yeah, that's interesting because maybe intuitively, that's why I've always been trying to burst out of the proscenium. You know, like have the set come out into the audience, or have the proscenium, or have them out into the boxes or something, to say theater and life, we're sort of connected, even though we're taking on a trip. It's a very big concern because it changes sometimes the dialectic in my classes and how I explain things. And we don't have a projection designer. Patrick Duors is teaching. He's our new hire, which is great. He was a former student, and he's intellectually delightful to have around, and he's doing wonderful work with the set. Because I primarily just do costumes unless I'm doing a show there. Right. Because when I came, there was already a set designer there for years and years, and they kind of apologized about hiring me because they said, "We know you're a set designer too, but are you okay just doing this?" And I said, "My mother's dying. I'm here, you know." Or, well, at that stage she died, but my father was with me and my uncle and I had a lot of family responsibility. I said, "Sure, I love teaching," and I do. It's saved my life many a time since I've been out here, because I'm just so happy to see people's minds open and find out what their possibilities are. But I do encourage them to really study the cultural mores and aspects of their society. And that means to look at the art of the time, the writing of the time, the philosophy, as well as the technical toys and things that are so charming and interesting. And I immediately think, well, if you're poor, you think, what can I do with cardboard? Well, you're going to think about... But that comes to a bit of my concern about how we're developing our artists in this country too, because I feel there's no system in place to help our artists, our young artists, or our medium-sized artists who are working in smaller theaters to transition to the larger theaters, to the opera stages, We're still hiring too many Americans, and we're still hiring too many British people to run our things. There's a big flat statement that people will yell about. But I am concerned about this because I think other countries, I was asking Patrick, I said, what is it like in England? You went and assisted Richard Hudson and a few other people on your grants over there. And he said, well, they have a system. It's a real hierarchy. You have to do this till you can do that, till you can do this, till you can do that. I think that's good. I also think if you've already had a background like I've had, you jump in a different way. Mm-hmm. But if you're following a more traditional route, because good heavens, I'd had 19 years of training with my mother, and other things. But I'm not quite sure how to help my students to realize it matters. And that just breaks my heart because I'm not sure if we're waiting on the demise of theater as we know it, and as someone who's always done new and unusual things. That may be fine because something else new and unusual that's different might come. We no longer, theater started in its most basic form. We all sat around the campfire. We told stories as a tribe, and everyone danced, everyone healed, everyone sang. And then we started to specialize. maybe this will make us come back to a collaborative, we're all artists doing something. And we might go through some bumpy periods, so you might not see the couture of theatre. I mean, the things that Michael Levine is doing in Europe are extremely sophisticated. He's based in London now. And he's a theoretician of ideas, a very elegant philosophy. I'm not sure it could happen in many places other than opera or ballet today, because they're the last place that has the money and the desire to see things in a more codified manner, even though it's very experimental, the stuff that they can do. Audiences want to come and be curious and have their minds open. I don't really care how it happens. Mine is not the only philosophy or the only way. I might speak about it very confidently and very outgoing, but that's just my nature of the way I express myself as an artist.
That's great. I think we'll leave it there.
Okay.
That was set and costume designer Mary Kerr speaking to me from her home in Victoria, BC in December of 2018. Next time I chat, I promise, with lighting and live event designer Robert Sondergaard. The music for this podcast is by Vern Good with voiceover by Gabriel Cropley. Please go to Apple Podcasts and give us a review. It'll help get the word out about this podcast and share the history of theatre design in Canada. And you can follow us on Twitter at TheTitleBlockCA and on Facebook.com/TheTitleBlockPodcast. You can send comments and requests by email to TheTitleBlock@gmail.com. And don't forget that if you like the show, please go support us on Patreon.com. Feel free to share this with your friends, colleagues, students, and teachers, or listen to it while you figure out, how we're all going to get through this ridiculous time. I'm Michael Cruz, and I'll see you next time on The Title Block. What is remarkable to me is that to a person, they are still optimistic about the ability of theater to move people, to tell a story in a way that is not like any other storytelling media, and the ability to solve problems. And I think that the kind of creative thinking that theater people do, that theater training gives you, gives me hope. Obviously, I'm not in the business anymore, so I've changed my path. But those who continue to strive in theater are thinking about ways to make a difference, and thinking about ways of telling stories that compel people to change